Hey, hello everyone. I love that music. Jessa's always got the best music. It's always put me in the mood. But hey, thanks for coming. Welcome to another Hacking HR event. I'm your moderator for today, Sony Tawari, CEO of Ref Masters, a company in sports and technology, and also a HR practitioner myself. Really excited to be here for this incredibly interesting, I think, and very applicable topic out there today as we conclude our June series on career development and job search. If you can, just give us a quick hello in the comments section. We always love to see where our participants are connecting with us from today. We've got a small but really sharp, shrewd, smart panel, and I think some interesting topics of discussion today. As always, we want this to be an interactive session, so please share your comments in the chat and we'll try to touch on them as they come in. So at this time, if we could bring our panel up to the stage. Hello, panel. Thank you again so much for joining us. Really looking forward to this chat. I was thinking maybe we could get a jump on it. I'll start first with Tashia on my screen. She's on my top right. Then move to Jackie, and then Alenia. And maybe what we can do, Tashia, we can start first with your name, where you're from, the type of work you do, but then maybe also a first question, which is, from your perspective, what do you see people most commonly get wrong about negotiating a job offer? So we're going to get right into the meat of it. As I give you a second there, Tashia, to think about that question. Again, I just want to encourage everyone to give us a quick hello wherever you're from today. We'd love to know. And then again, remind you that this is always meant to be a very interactive and engaging session. So we'd love to see your comments and questions come in as our panelists share their thoughts. So Tashia, I'll pass it over to you. Or Tashia, my apologies if I've got the pronunciation incorrect.
Tasha is the correct pronunciation. So I am Tasha Millette, and I am in Los Angeles. I am a HR consultant. I own my own practice, but also have been a chief people officer for many years within HR. I would say the number one thing that I don't see people doing is negotiating. A lot of times people feel like whatever the employer posts, they're just grateful to have, and they don't have the confidence or the understanding that they can negotiate a salary to begin that discussion. So I thought this topic was very relevant, and even the title itself.
I'm on mute. I've done two things wrong. I've talked on mute, and I've got one of our panelists' names mispronounced. So I'm off to a sparkling start, but I can only get better from here. But you make a really good point. And I think we're going to have an opportunity in this hour to dive more into maybe some of the barriers why people don't negotiate more. But love that you're bringing that to the surface so early. Thank you. We'll move to our next panelist, Jackie.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jackie Hazan. I, like Tasha, run my own HR consulting practice, and I'm also an executive coach. I have many years of experience behind me as an HR executive and chief people officer on the global stage, and I am so thrilled to be here today with all these great panelists. I think one thing that I don't see people doing, I thought Tasha's call out was a great one. People often don't negotiate, but I think people often also don't check their emotions through the negotiation process. It is really hard to unhook emotionally through that process.
Love that. Yes, absolutely. And again, I think that's another area where we'll have some opportunity in this hour to dive into some of the factors that come into play there. I just want to say hello to some of our folks that are visiting us in the audience. Juma from Tanzania. We've got another Jackie from London, Valerie, Hassan, Ina, Paul, Joshua. So glad to have you here today. But I'll pass it over to our last panelist now.
Yes, hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here on this very great discussion and topic. I am from Latvia, and I work as a chief HR officer, and I very much relate what you are saying, but I also think I could add that people, what they don't do is they don't prepare for negotiations. Like they just come and request things, so without arguments, and that kind of goes together with emotions, I think, as well, very much.
No doubt about that. I love that angle as well. Three lenses I think that we can explore further in this conversation. I want to come back to something that Tasha had mentioned right off the bat, which is that people just don't negotiate enough. And perhaps it's for reasons, like Jackie, you mentioned the emotions part of it. And, Lena, you mentioned the lack of preparation. So maybe that's all kind of coming into head here. But Tasha, what's your take? What are the biggest factors of why individuals don't come to the negotiating table more often, or that they don't come more often?
I would say probably the top reason is the fear of being rejected, right? And so I think that's one of the main reasons. I do think from traditional marginalized groups, there is a stigma behind negotiating as well, and a lack of confidence that comes from being from those traditionally marginalized groups that shows up in the negotiation process as well. So I think those are two of the main factors globally: fear of rejection, and then from traditional marginalized groups, fear of being accepted.
I love that you're bringing that up, and yeah, absolutely a big. I don't want to just say DEI because I feel like we're putting it in a box when I say that, but I think there is an intersectional conversation here when it comes to negotiating that is really important. We have our last panelist is able to join us. Thank you so much. Perhaps Joanna, you could give us an introduction about yourself, and maybe you could also give us your perspective on the first question we asked, which was, from your perspective, the thing that people get wrong about negotiating.
Yes, so happy to be here and honored and happy to contribute my thoughts to the discussion. I believe negotiation is a big one, especially in this day and age where everything is fluid in the workplace, isn't it? My name is Joanna Ardeline. I'm a HR department head for an organization. I also have a work-life balance company on the side, and I'm really passionate about that. Now, in terms of what people are missing when they negotiate, I think it's the spectrum of things that can truly be negotiated. I think we stop short of just thinking salary and vacation and potentially our schedule, working from home or not, but there is so much more that can be brought on the table if only we would ask. And I would submit to your consideration that one of those items that we don't typically consider to negotiate is the actual title of a position we might apply. We believe, and I used to be one of those in the past, where I thought, well, I mean, the title is the title they want, right? I mean, it's set in stone, and I can't dare ask if I can have a different title. And I'm here to mention that I've actually successfully done so for the last 3 positions that I've had, negotiated a higher title of up to 3 steps higher than what they originally put in that job description or that job ad. And so there's several other items, and I'm sure we can discuss a little bit more as we go along in the conversation. But my contribution is to consider that everything is negotiable.
Hey, panel, curious if you've got thoughts on whether it's title or, as Joanna mentioned, some of the other things maybe that we don't think are in the purview in the negotiation conversation.
I mean, it's my opinion that everything is negotiable, right? And I think it's clarifying for yourself what are the most important levers that you want to negotiate on, right? And developing a strategy ahead of receiving an offer to understand how you're going to navigate to get the outcomes that you want, right? With any negotiation, it's a give and take. There are going to be points that you're going to have to be willing to flex on. And clarifying those for yourselves ahead of time can be really helpful so that in the moment, you're not under pressure finding yourself giving more than you actually intended to.
I think the title is interesting from an HR perspective, and depending upon the size and scope of the team, of the HR group that is pulling together the job description, because a lot of times, to your point, we're pulling together a new position within the organization, or an emerging need comes up, and we're taking an old job description potentially and adding things to it. And without gut checking that with the market, you can inflate or deflate a position. So sometimes it is up to the candidate who has done that type of work in the past to actually speak up about that during the recruitment process. And I've definitely done that in my career, where I felt that the position was asking for too much based on salary or based on title. And I think that's a brilliant point that a lot of people don't think about early on in the recruiting process, because that recruiter can then go back to the team and start that conversation about level setting the position.
Yeah, we've got a comment from Celeste Ross. She says, for title negotiations, was that for new jobs you're hiring for or for positions you currently were holding? A little unsure of the last part of that question, but I think, and panel, let me know if you've got other thoughts, we're talking about new jobs.
I've actually negotiated once I'm in-house too. Sometimes the dynamics change on the ground. Your role can change mid-year, mid-assignment, right? And being able to recognize and call out and negotiate for adjustments based on what's happening in the ground, I think is just as important once you're hired as it is pre-offer.
She's got another comment from Alejandra. They write, from an employer perspective, in markets driven by candidate demand, like IT or engineering, what would you recommend for recruiters to prepare for such negotiations?
I think it's a hot market, right? And so part of that is really understanding the company's internal budget and where you're willing to go. But doing compensation studies is critical prior to actually posting that job, so you have an understanding of the perks and benefits that are typically offered. Joanna had mentioned before, sometimes it's not just base salary that lures those type of candidates in. It's remote work. It's being able to take additional training and certifications. It's bonus potential, et cetera. So being able to understand the levers that you can pull based on your budget and market is super important in those hotbed type of positions in industries.
Yes, I can add to that as well, that actually, like, preparation for recruitment and really investigating inside, asking those questions, like from HR side, challenging business when we are actually hiring. What are you willing to do to get this person with the set skills and so on, and so that we are also, like, situation where we can be more flexible, and then recruitment is easier. Yeah.
I would definitely agree. And I want to add that in today's market, especially in those type of technical positions, right, engineering, IT, and such, it is tough to recruit. We all know that for a lot of different positions, but for those even more so. So I believe it's tremendously important to have those opportunities that you mentioned before. What is the whole gamut of things that we offer? So one thing that I believe we don't speak a lot about as recruiters or HR professionals is the opportunities to mentor someone and for them to grow with the company. Now, that might require to have some sort of internal program already set up, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the case. A lot of younger professionals are really looking for that mentor and someone to be there to help. And that goes a long way if we share that through the recruiting process or even the advertising process, that we are growing people and we're there to hold their hand when the times get tough, and we'll help them, get additional certifications or anything else like that we typically do, but perhaps we forget to share. That's tremendously sought after, I believe, in the younger generations today. And it might behoove us to talk more about it and really even advertising. I think we perhaps do talk about it, but I don't know that we advertise enough about it.
I think just one other thing I'd add there, and I see a comment from Holly sharing just some context she didn't have when she was hired, right? I think conditioning ourselves, whether we're a job seeker or a recruiter or a hiring manager, to seek context and give context, right? The more context we can gather about the workplace we're entering, the job conditions, the team conditions, similarly on the candidate side, what the candidate preferences, working styles, desires are, right? Career objectives. The more context we have and data points that we have around that as we seek to enter a negotiation to bring a candidate in or land ourselves a new job, right? That will help us better clarify what we need to be negotiating on and make sure that we are entering in the best possible manner or bringing a candidate in the best possible manner to be successful down the line.
I think you raise a really good point as well from a recruiting perspective, for those HR practitioners on the call, asking the candidate what's important to them. And I think that will help and go a long way with the negotiation process, because there could be some creative things that need to happen with work-life balance, et cetera, that you're able to do that are not a financial commitment to the organization, but more being able to meet the person where they are. So I think that's really important. And if the recruiter doesn't ask, for the candidate to be able to state those things as they're negotiating.
Now, we've all been in situations where maybe in the hiring process, there is not a lot of transparency around compensation in the early stages. And Heather Gaston, she has a question about applying for roles where salary details, where no package or salary is defined. Can you speak to the best framework or starting point for negotiation? And then maybe also timing in terms of, do you talk about this first at screening, or do you wait until later when offers on the table? I imagine there's some different factors that might come into play there, but interested in your thoughts on this panel.
This is one I feel really strongly about. I always strongly coach and advise my clients to put the onus on the recruiter and the hiring team to share a salary range with you first. It is totally fair game once you have that information to anchor the recruiter around a range that's acceptable for you. I would encourage going slightly higher than you might be willing to accept, right? Typically, your high range is the high anchor, and they'll usually come in somewhere below that, to be totally frank. But it is completely acceptable to put the onus on the recruiter and the hiring team to come to you with a range. And companies that push back on that, I think it's really just a reflection of immaturity around their compensation practices and some of their hiring practices. And honestly, we spoke a little bit about some of the stigma for people who represent diversity in negotiating, right? I think this is one area where that stigma really does show up, where women and people of color in particular get really uncomfortable not giving their salary range when asked versus pushing for the other party to share the range.
Luckily, I'm in California, so we don't have that problem anymore. But
Thank
I
goodness.
will say nobody wants to go. The recruiter or the candidate wants to go through any process without knowing upfront what the salary is. So if it's not stated to you in the initial screening, you should ask. Don't waste your time, and don't feel like you can't ask the recruiter early on. I think both parties would appreciate knowing where everyone's going to land at the end.
So on that point, I think we've got some alignment on the general approach when there's not a lot of salary information shared up front. Coming back to something that was discussed a few minutes ago around having a negotiation when you're currently in an organization and maybe it's scope of the role has changed or there's a conversation around promotion. What is a conversation internally? Or is it a little different? What are some of the things to look for there? And maybe since we've got a lot of HR people in the room, someone had a question a few minutes ago around how do I, as a HR practitioner, how do I position my value and worth, when I'm having that conversation around a promotion or a raise within the organization and having a negotiation that way?
Maybe I can start on this one. So in our daily life, we face situations where employees are challenging us with these kind of questions, and like they say, "Okay, I have outgrown my role. I would like to change my role and my job title," and then it's basically, if we don't have an answer why you cannot have your other position or title, then we have not done our homework. So actually, well, usually when people come with these kind of things, they know why they want to have it, and those it's actually, it doesn't have to be like in a court between HR and employee wanting to have this change. It's usually like it's happening naturally. Yeah. Mhm.
I can.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I would submit that in HR, perhaps, and this, because the question comes from an HR professional, and of course, all of us seem to be in HR, I'll mention that perhaps we are not as comfortable with data and numbers and metrics. And I believe it starts there, right? So when you're looking for a promotion, and especially in HR, to try and quantify our value, having those metrics and that data behind you would go a long way. It actually tells the story you want to say in numbers, and then leaders can actually hear what you're saying, right? In the end, everything we do, if we sit down to look through it, does have an impact on the bottom line. But are we actually doing the work and sharing that story as to how it impacts the bottom line? And doing that through numbers, right? Even more so, it's how you get that promotion and how you get that higher salary and a different title and everything else you might want, flexibility or work from home or whatever that is. Once you're able to share that value that you bring, again, using some metrics, and that might require that we track our work and the impact that it has and provide some estimates as to the dollar impact it truly has. And it's not as hard as we initially think it might be. So for instance, I want to submit to your consideration that perhaps we already track turnover rates, for instance, right? That's one of the metrics in HR that we track. Okay, but that's fine, right? We have, let's say, 10% turnover rates. But what does that mean? What does that mean? 10% turnover rate. Let's take it down to understand, okay, that means, let's say in the customer service or order departments, there are 10% or more, potentially more orders that are being processed because we're missing 10% of the people there. What does that do? How many orders is that? What is the dollar that would be associated with that? And that hits straight to the bottom line, doesn't it? Right? So it's taking the process all the way to the bottom line and telling that story so that leadership can no longer say no when you're coming with a proposition of a higher title or higher salary or a bonus or whatever that might be. So I think it's we in HR are sometimes cutting our impact short by only sharing some numbers that may not have the meaning we want them to have, or at least in the leadership's eyes, right? We perhaps need to take some additional steps to really quantify for them, how does this take me to the bottom line?
I would jump in from a promotion perspective internally. I would say from my experience being in HR, and every HR team and department is a little different, but you have internal data at that point and a structure that when you extend the offer to someone who's being promoted, there's little room for negotiation, right? We've done an internal analysis in order to place that position within the current structure. And so typically promotions aren't really negotiable at that level. There's some aspects in room for it, but you're looking more at a hardline budget at that point. So I would say that if you are going through a promotion or requesting a promotion at work, you're not necessarily happy with the range, you should express that with your manager. I think it's important for them to know, and then to look for a future point that you can negotiate. So again, if the fiscal year is coming up, maybe you say in the next 3 months, you would like to revisit the salary, or as you're able to demonstrate your performance and value in that role, that there's a check-in point that you're able to later negotiate. But unfortunately, usually at the point of promotion, there's very little room for negotiation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
if I could piggyback off of that just real fast and trying to help the person who commented there. And I totally agree with what was just said. I think, though, as an owner of our own career, and I look at that as how I would process things, I would know when that promotion comes because I had already planned for it and I put that in front of my supervisor, and we've already discussed that well ahead of time and the metrics that I need to hit and what needs to happen for me to get that promotion. So when it actually happens, it's a foregone fact. I've already known about that, and we've already talked about it so much in advance that now it's no surprise, and I'm not sitting there at the promotion table being surprised by what might be offered, right? So to your point, right, if that happens, and I don't know about it, right, my supervisor brings in that promotion, and certainly the budget is already set at that point, yes, but I want to turn that on its head a little bit, turn the tables, if you will, and say, as employees, it's on us to take ownership of our career and create those promotions for ourselves and work right alongside our supervisors to make that happen and plan for it and put all the steps in place to get there. So then when we're there, we've already negotiated all there is, and we have already expressed what we want. And it might just be, okay, well, I wasn't able to get you this, but we were able to get a higher title, or we got the other thing, right? It might not be the exact package, but we already know what's coming, right? So I think here we play a dual hat, right? Like we're HR representing the organization, we're also employees ourselves. And so it depends what lens you're looking at it from. Certainly as an employee, I would say your career is on you, right? And certainly your supervisor manager is there to help alongside, but you're the owner of it. And so take the steps to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, a quick maybe one way how to negotiate HR's own salary is like in our company, it's actually if HR in a high level position, then basically showing that you are focused on what matters for business and working on those KPIs, and then like okay. If we as a function we are able to put together what's important and show how we can improve and how a particular person is improving that, and of course head of HR helping and giving feedback and so on, helping their team as well, then this is definitely something you can really strongly step on as a way to get this promotion or salary increase, if not like a physical title promotion.
So let's pivot a little bit here. Let's say you're having the conversation. You've got a plan, and you've done some research, and you've articulated what you're looking for, and they say no. This comes back to the appetite that some of us have. Some of us naturally have a little more appetite to push back, right? And sometimes if we don't come into that conversation prepared, we end up maybe acquiescing, and then later on going, "Oh, I should have said this. I should have done that. I shouldn't have taken more time, or I should have taken more time." What are the things you'd recommend in this situation where you're not aligned on some of the details in the negotiation? What are some things that maybe you should think about saying? Some things maybe you should avoid saying, because it's not just a high emotion point for you. It could be a high emotion point for the other person on the other side of the table too, that feels like what they have to offer is very good, very reasonable or generous, etc. So there could be emotions on the side of the hiring manager or HR as well that has goals to meet, etc. They've got their own stakeholders. So yeah, what are your advice in terms of things to maybe think about saying, things to think about not saying in that environment, that type of conversation?
Yeah, so if I can start with a quick one, I would say that this discussion needs to be a two-way street. And if you say no to me for some kind of increase, my question would be, how can I get there? What do I need to do? Please help me to figure out, just so that I'm not on my own and I don't feel rejected and you don't feel pushed. So it's a conversation.
Yeah, I want to second that real fast. In my experience, no means not yet. So then if not now, then when? And how do we get there? To your point, to the prior panels, it truly is, that's my goal. How do we get there? If not now, when? And what are the steps to get me there? And to my prior contribution, right? Then we now create a plan. And we know when it's going to happen. Okay, we can't do it this year because of budgetary constraints, whatever the case might be. But let's revisit that and let's create a plan for what I need to do so we get this with next year's budget, or maybe in 2 years, whatever the plan might be.
I think going back to, I think that's a very emotional state to be in. And Jackie had mentioned that before, because going into that conversation, you have a number, you have envisioned where you want yourself to be, and your employer is not meeting that. So given that it's emotional, I would say the first step is to get all of the facts and ask the right questions, put the emotions out of it, and get to the bottom line. What was the salary increase? What are they asking you to do? Are you going to have more direct reports? Any information that you can get from that conversation that will help you with a negotiation. And that negotiation doesn't have to happen in that moment. When that offer is made, you can then ask for a day or two to consider the offer before accepting. So if you're in an emotional state at that point, get the information, ask for a couple days to process it, think through your strategy for negotiation, and come back to the table at that point. So that would be my advice in that situation. It may end up being a no, but I think at least by the time you're able to have the conversation with the manager or the recruiter, you've laid out what your expectations are moving forward in a very thoughtful way.
Yeah, I think those are really sound and very helpful points to approaching it without letting the emotion take control, right? It's really hard to hear no when it's about your salary and your benefits. I think also considering, right, that not only do you not have to respond in the moment, it's okay to ask for a couple days. It's also okay to respond via email after you've asked for those couple days, right? It is often much harder when you're in a face-to-face conversation with someone to negotiate versus being able to objectively and thoughtfully lay out what you're asking for. And to, if Elena's point, pulling that person in through the email to say, I understand we may not be able to structure it exactly this way, but help me get there, right? What are some creative ways that we can try to tackle this together to get to an outcome? And you'd be surprised. Oftentimes employers will come back with things like a signing bonus, or they may have some out of the box idea around a 1-year anniversary bonus or some additional equity that holds value, right? And it may not be exactly what you're asking for, but through managing the emotions in the process and taking the time that you need to really collect your thoughts and negotiating in a way that puts you in a power seat, not in an emotional seat, right? Usually there's some path that gets you very close to where you want to go.
So on the point of figuring out what your bottom line, what are your requirements in order to accept an offer? Because you might put out you might counter with some requests. What are your thoughts in terms of figuring that out? Figuring out what is the baseline that I need to feel good about this? Because you don't want to be in a situation where you accept an offer and then a few weeks or a few months later, you're just got the regret of, wow, I should have held out for this or that, or I should have not stepped into this when I did. You don't want to have that remorse, I suppose. So I recognize that I think that whatever that thing is going to be different for everyone, depending on their, all the factors that comprise their life. But what are the things that someone should be thinking about in terms of how to set their floor and stick to it?
That's such a good question. I mean, to your point, there's so many factors that can go into it, and it's highly personalized based on the individual. But I usually recommend looking at what are just your basic needs that have to be met, right? From a comp perspective, lifestyle perspective. Usually people, if they spend a few minutes thinking about it, do have a floor, right? And even being able to articulate that floor is really helpful, right? Because that is one marker of where you won't go below. And then I usually will walk through with clients and do some exploration, right? When you've been in other roles, other companies, what has felt really positive, fulfilling, energizing to you, whether that's benefits, whether that's perks, whether that's how you were rewarded along the way through bonuses, through equity, et cetera. And that will usually begin to paint a picture for the individual around, actually, I really value high equity compensation because I am personally driven when I have a stake in the success of the company, or actually I'm really risk adverse. I want a high base salary. I don't care about bonus because I've been screwed on the bonus before, right? So I think it's that pre-expiration that's really, really helpful in being able to articulate. And it could be small things too, right? Like for me, when I was in-house as a chief people officer, my reporting line was really critical because I had a really bad experience where I did not negotiate in the contract that I could only report into the CEO. And I had been shoved under finance or under operations. And to all my HR professionals out there, that is that is a pretty clear line of lack of value of the HR function when those changes start being made, and it can really impact your ability to operate at the senior table. So after I had that one experience, I was very careful to negotiate on that moving forward, and that was a non-negotiable for me. I would not take a job that would not agree to that. So you'll find those lines for yourself as you explore what your past experiences were.
And I would add on to that. I think there are going to come points in your career where an opportunity comes up that may present a different either track for you to step on or an opportunity to accelerate your career. And it's important as you're applying for jobs, just taking a step back, that you're really mindful of what your career trajectory is going to look like, that you've actually sat down with a plan and you're very intentional about the positions that you're applying for, the companies that you're seeking out. So that helps you stay on track. So assuming you're on that path and track, again, there may be times where you're going to take an opportunity that gets you where you need to be by taking less salary. It was more about the title. It was more about the reporting relationship. It was more about the company and the exposure that company gave you than the actual pay, perks, and benefits of that opportunity. So I do think it's multifaceted in terms of, what your baseline or floor should be as you're negotiating, because there are so many different aspects that you have to look at. But I think cost of living is super important. I made a move from the East Coast to Los Angeles. Super important to look at, what is the cost of living in the area, in the market that you're trying to, get into potentially, if that entails a relocation. Super important to understand where your paycheck is going. In LA, it's rent, food, and gas. So doing the due diligence before you jump into that opportunity, I think it's really important, and being mindful of where you want to go in your career and what your bottom line is financially for yourself. And I think Jackie hit on a lot of those points.
Excellent perspective on that panel, and great questions also from our attendees, our participants today. I've got another one, a pretty specific scenario I'd be interested for the panel to chime in on. Celeste says, I find the biggest barrier today is quote unquote, wait your turn, you have to earn your place here mentality. But really, if one is doing the job successfully, even if they have only been there for a year versus the ideal 5, reward them appropriately. What are your thoughts on this mindset in practice?
I jump in to say at some point there's a budget implication, right, to making any moves within the organization. So at the very early stages of the budget formation process, we're typically working with hiring managers to do some workforce planning. How many promotions do we see coming up in the next year? How many vacancies do we have? How many new positions? So we're creating everything based on a budget. So there's limited bandwidth to make movement within the organization in order to meet the company's financial targets and goals. So I'll put that down as kind of the baseline and floor. Hopefully, as you're going through the interview process, you're asking about the performance management process and how they're identifying high potential and high performing individuals. That's going to be super important. If they're just doing an annual review, for instance, you only have one time to really shine and be considered for a promotion, versus companies that are engaging in more frequent conversations about performance and doing talent assessments and 9-boxing and succession planning and those type of things. So I would ask about the performance management approach and how they identify those individuals who are next up in line for promotion. And also talking about the company structure, because sometimes if you're in a smaller organization or an organization that doesn't have much movement, just because of the structure, again, the size of an organization, the ability for promotions could be could be an issue because people tend to stay in positions longer, think government, type of agencies, et cetera. So you don't have the ability to move up because somebody's quote unquote blocking you. And so, or you just have more tenure is a better way to put it. So I think you have to ask those questions up front. And then I think there's a self-assessment piece of it, a scan that you have to do, knowing what you want, your relationship with your manager, the organization, and what they have available. You can really sense whether you're adding value and whether you're on a track for promotion. And if that's not happening for you, and I have very transparent conversations with people when they're at that point of feeling like they don't know what's next or the company's not being transparent with them, we have conversations about what's next for them. And how can I help you if it's not within the organization externally to be able to get the next thing, the next opportunity for yourself? So I think there comes a point in your assessment of the organization and the assessment of your needs where you have to make a decision whether you stay or you go.
So coming back to the emotion part of this, is that Jackie and Tasha in particular, I think you've put some really good focus on the importance of keeping your emotions in the right place or keeping the emotions out of the place, which may be the right place. Is there any self-talk? Is there a process? Is there an approach that you would recommend in the negotiation process that can go days and longer even? So sometimes it can, the emotions come up and down and up. What is your best advice to navigate the emotions of that, whether it's self-talk, whether it's putting on a movie, whether it's talking to a trusted confidant, whatever that might be? Interested in your thoughts here.
For me, I love talking it out with a buddy, right? Having somebody I can vent to, I can get all the emotion out where it's safe for me to be upset or cry or laugh or yell, whatever the feeling is, right? That allows me to then show up much more objectively with the person that I actually need to have the conversation with. And even just being able to sense check with my peers, like, hey, I got this offer. It feels like I'm off by about this much, even just taking into account what I know to be the case from a market perspective. Gut check, does that feel right to you guys, right? It helps you sanity check and trust your judgment and trust your gut a little bit more as you go through and you prep for these conversations.
And I would say a lot of it is knowing your worth. So same with Jackie, having those role play conversations or getting advice is really key. But knowing your worth is is the bottom line, right? And so for me, if I'm in a situation where I know that I am worth the value that I'm putting on the table, sometimes I'll ride into work and listen to I am affirmations and build up my self-confidence and self-esteem. So when I get in the room that may be presented with counters or rejection, that I'm still in my full self and being able to be present and negotiate and see myself through that. So I think for me, being more of a mindfulness type of person, the affirmations are huge in pumping yourself up before you get into that negotiation room.
Yeah, I'll second what Tasha just said. Certainly having objective data from the market, right? So you know what's being offered is in the ballpark of what otherwise you might be able to get in the market. I think that's the first part. So you have a comparison point, right? So doing that research is really critical. But then from a mindset standpoint, for me, it's actually getting my body active, right? Getting out there. I go for my runs, can I get the endorphins out? Can I get all the emotions out that way and calm my body down so that I'm ready, to Tasha's point, right? When you walk in that room, you're ready and the emotions are removed from the situation. And then, of course, being armed with the data also helps. So you can navigate that conversation a lot more objectively, and saying something to the effect, I see the offer you brought, I'm curious, and that's a nice word to use, right? Curious. I'm curious as to how you got to this point based on the data I see in the market, and then maybe even providing a copy. This is really off base. Can we, talk about it? Can we look a little bit more into it? Right? So that, again, you have the objective, but then also your emotions, right? You process through those before you're in the room. And of course, everyone is different as to how they process those emotions, but it is critical that you keep the emotions out, right? Otherwise, you get entangled into the conversation and you really speak from that unsettled type of mood versus objectively based on what truly the data says and what you could truly get.
Yeah, I can quickly add as well. Yeah, being prepared, definitely, that works for me. And actually, maybe having a good laugh before you actually go to some serious conversation, that you have some person you really trust and you can talk through what you are planning. And so, like for me, it's CFO, and I usually I list the things, and she's very rational, and then she's like, okay, this is emotions, this is that, and we have a good laugh. And when I go, I feel more calm, and more confident about, like, nothing bad is going to happen anyway. Like, I am prepared, I know what I want, and I'm ready to smile and discuss, and not like be in a position where I'm afraid to talk because I have assumptions about things that will happen, probably will not.
I think Joanna mentioned something that I wanted to just make sure we call out during this process, because we've been talking a little bit about, HR's role and how we help both employees in the company in the negotiation process. And so again, while some states are not being as transparent with pay ranges yet, HR is always a great source as you're either looking for the promotion or, again, as we went back to the beginning, in the candidate stage, asking for appropriate salary ranges or where people are within the organization with the same skill and or position is super helpful for the negotiation process. And sometimes people feel like they can't come to HR to ask for that information. It's easier to ask HR for that information so you understand where you are within the company structure than to try to get information from other organizations, because it's not apples to apples in all scenarios. So I saw a comment about somebody saying that they can leave one organization and make 30% higher somewhere else, and there are different compensation structures, budgeting structures, etc. As much information as you can get internally from your organization to bring to the table in that negotiation process, the better. And they should be transparent with you, because at the end of the day, you're accepting an offer and you want to make sure it's fair and that they're being as transparent as possible with you during that process. So it speaks volumes to an employer who can share the range of where that position falls and why they put you where you are. So I think that's important conversation to have as you're negotiating as well.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective there. And coming back to something Alina said, you said that you go to your CFO for a laugh. That's something I don't hear that often. So I think you've got a good situation there for sure. As we start to wind down a little bit, let's talk about no. We had some back and forth. You've requested your things. They've come back and they've moved a little bit, but not enough. You've had that back and forth, and this is not the job you're going to take. What is your advice on how to say no the right way? I think this gets left behind a lot of times in negotiating, is we're like always wanting to negotiate a yes, but sometimes you just got to know when to walk away, and you got to be able to and you ought to be able to say it in a way, in the right ways. So yeah, interested in your thoughts here, panel.
I would say it's a small world. Do not burn bridges in that conversation. You may come around that recruiter or hiring manager again, or there may be an opportunity at that organization. And it's okay to say no, express why, and ask if, there are other positions that are available within your desired salary range that fit your skill set, to really keep you in the mix and keep you posted. You've gone through the interview process. You clearly got to the stage where they wanted to extend you an offer. They saw you there at the organization. Again, it's just a salary or compensation type of issue that occurred that doesn't invalidate the experience whatsoever. So I would just say, do it gracefully, and always leave the door open in that conversation.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's all about grace. It's about respect. Hopefully it's clear to the recruiter that there's a potentially a decline coming, right? If you've been really clear along the way with your negotiation points, it generally is obvious that there's a mismatch in some area. So if you are clear in the negotiation process, you're not going to be sending a bomb to the recruiter or shockwaves in an organization. So always keep that in mind, because I find that helps take some of the pressure off, right? And to Tasha's point, it is a very, very small world. So I will always offer, if there's anybody in my network that I think I can refer to you, I'm happy to do that. If you have any questions around my decline or why I'm choosing not to accept this role, know that you can reach out at any time. And that just leaves a nice bridge open for the person to be able to reach back out if they'd like to, and hopefully no hard feelings.
Ideally, I hope we don't get to that point in the process where we're that misaligned at the end of the process that we have to decline based on salary. Hopefully that was all fleshed out in the very beginning, and we didn't take you through that process with such a big disconnect.
At the same time,
Yeah, I would agree with the rest of the panelists. It's really important to not burn those bridges, and being transparent, right? Why you have to move away, but that you really enjoyed, and certainly you had a lot of interest in the company, and you've gone so far in the process that you would consider another position or working for them in the future, so that it's clear, right? There is just some points in the negotiation there that couldn't be met, and so no, you're moving away, but you'd consider them again in the future. I think that point is truly helpful for them to hear.
Quick hit here on our last question. So to Tasha's point, you hope you get to the end of the process and you've come into an alignment with the organization. Who's the first person? This is a bit of a personal question, if you don't mind. Who's the first person you contact when you've negotiated something successfully to tell the news?
I just had a recent death in my family. So my mom would have been the person I've always gone to. She passed away in February. So now I'll have to figure out who that is.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Very sorry, Tasha. And I would also say, it's my husband and it's my mom. Definitely, I would run to them and tell, I got it. It's just, I'm amazing.
For me, it's my husband as well. So certainly those who are very close by.
Nice.
Or, even if I had a mentor, and sometimes I do through the negotiation process,
Yep.
right? Just someone to share how the negotiation is going, and for them to help me get the emotions out and get my feet right back on the ground, right? If I'm kind of moving in the territory that's more emotional than realistic, they help me get there. So I would certainly circle back with them and share the news as well.
All right, well, panelists, I want to thank you all again. Really insightful discussion. I gleaned a lot. And audience, thank you so much. You asked really great questions and always appreciate the engagement. We've got a couple of months off now at Hacking HR. July and August, we won't have sessions, but in September, we've got some more on the general theme of people, culture, and strategy. So we hope that you'll check that out. You can visit the Hacking HR website or the page on LinkedIn for details on those sessions coming up in September. Thanks again to all of you panelists and for all of you that attended today and the whole Hacking HR team, Jessa, Enrique, for continuing to usher these valuable conversations. We hope you have a great day, great evening, great morning, wherever you are. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Have a great one.